people say use staining colors for luminosity, but how do you know which pigments are staining before you ruin your painting? Georgia O'Keeffe didn't have any pigment codes or staining labels like we conveniently have today. But she absolutely noticed how certain pigments behaved like close enough to dyes. They sank in, stayed luminous, and didn't lift. Today I'll be recreating Over Blue, one of her paintings that I absolutely love, and eventually we'll be painting a portrait of Georgia O'Keeffe with the techniques that I've learned from doing a study of Over Blue. But before we get in, I would like to share the 5 common struggles or problems that a lot of artists have when it comes to staining colors. The problem number 1 is identification. How do I know which colors are staining? The rule of thumbs that I go by is basically the name, although the name can vary among a lot of different brands. If the name includes phthalo, quinacridone, those are the 2 main names that often does make me think that it must be relatively staining compared to other colors. Now, the other thing that will be more definitive is looking at the pigment code. These are all the staining colors, but if you see any color index that has PB15, it means that it has the phthalo blue, so that means it's going to be staining. The next one is PV19, which is quinacridone rose. Other brands go by different name. Hansa yellow, PY3, is staining. And then indanthrone blue is often staining. That's PV60. And dioxazine purple by M. Graham is PV23. PV23 is staining color. Now, some companies will go by different name. Graham says it's dioxazine purple, whereas Schmincke will call it Schmincke violet, and it's PV23. But the best thing is to look at the code index, and it's because often with all these brands, this one is the core, this one is Winsor Newton, this one is M. Graham, this one is Daniel Smith. All of these ones that I have right here would not tell you whether they are staining or non-staining. They would only tell you the pigment code index and often whether it's from which series, the light fastness. I often find this for myself as well, mixing it up, but permanence doesn't mean that it stays permanent on your palette or anything like that, which hence could kind of make you think, oh, does that mean that it's staining? No, it isn't. It's longevity with light fastness. So don't mix those up. The tubes of paint that you might come across as like fugitive and they fade over time, but when it has permanent alizarin and crimson, it means that it's the lasting version of that, if that makes sense. But I came across that Schmincke actually has this staining factor written with a symbol. So this is only with Schmincke, which I just noticed, and I was like, oh my god, that's excellent, is that they would tell you everything pretty much on the tube. Schmincke is the only one that will have the pigment index on the top left in the back, and then they will also have these symbols. So basically the stars are the light fastness, then they'll have the square, which is, I think it was the transparency, so this one would mean it's transparent, it's like luminous, and the triangle was if it's staining or not. So this is like semi-staining. So excellent. I wish all of the companies pretty much did this so we don't have to be like, where does it say, you know? But a good practice is to get yourself into swatching all of your pigments once you buy them and you're welcoming them into the house, which I do, so you have a clear distinction of whether they're granulating, transparent, staining, light fast, and so forth, and the pigment index right there. So number 2 problem is glazing lips and muddies. That's how I put it. Why is it that when I glaze / layer on top of what I've already laid down underneath and it's been perfectly dry, let's just say, why do they start mudding? Like, I always muddy my watercolor. So I hear this a lot. And the fix to this problem is, first you need to lay the non-staining and then you put on the staining colors. Now there's a lot of, I think, confusion around it, because I even had that. I was like, well, if the staining doesn't lift and it's hard to lift, then why not put that first and then the non-staining at the top? Well, it doesn't work that way. I think the best thing to think about it is like writing. You sketch the letters out with a pencil and then you put the ink on top of it, right? So it's kind of like that. So let me get a color that's not staining first. Let's go with cobalt blue. Oh, this is not a watercolor paper. I don't know if it's the best idea, because it needs to be cotton 100% to be able to, basically it's like a cloth, right? You can scrub it and work into it, and you can also lift it because it's like, it takes the beating. So I'll have to change this paper actually. Let's do Bao Hong paper, shall we? It's much cheaper. Okay, let's do this using Bao Hong. It's cheaper. There's no other way to it. I'm going to lay down the cobalt blue first. This is a non-staining color. Okay, it's a PB28. Ultramarine is also non-staining, but let's just see how that goes. I'm going to choose the nickel azo yellow. As the name implies, azo, it is staining. Okay, so I'm going to use this color. I think it's this one right here. So I am going to put down this azo right next to it, and then I'm going to write down number 1 was non-staining, sting. Okay, I forgot to spell things. Okay, I'm getting artist brain. I am going to use a help of a dryer because I want to get this done quickly. I know it hasn't dried up yet, but okay. That's so interesting, right? Like, when I look at these two, I definitely like the look of this one better than this one. I don't know how about you. And it just feels really scary to do this one, to go over the staining with a non-staining for some reason. But it's so weird, because in my head for a long time, I thought putting the staining first would be like the way to go. And I think I even learned this from another artist, to go with the staining and then go with the non-staining. Let's just do a quick test. I want to do a test with staining yellow, which is the nickel azo yellow, and the non-staining yellow ochre, to see how these two, when compared, how easy it is to lift. I will leave them to dry naturally, and we'll be coming back to see like if the yellow ochre actually is easier to lift. And bear in mind, I am using watercolor paper, 100% cotton, but it is hot press, which means that they get inside, they sink in, and there's not much groove. So that means it's going to be hard to like scratch things off and lift it off. Problem number 3 is being scared of permanent mistakes. So a lot of people talk about, I'm terrified of staining colors because if I make a mistake, I can't go back. But there's a workaround. Now, I would say the key to this fix is to use the non-staining colors 80% of the area of the painting. It's not easy, but it's more doable to fix it, so to speak. And use 20% of the staining colors on the top at the end, like where there needs to be like depth or some mass tones. Then you use the staining colors. I think that is the best way to go about it. Now, there are things that you can use to kind of erase the mistakes, and one of them being use tons of water and then try blotting them up with a paper towel. Let's use this Pyro Orange by Core, which is a staining color. So say I go over like this, and then what I do is, oh no, I made a mistake, I didn't want that. Add tons of water and then try to lift as much as you can, although it is quite hard. Okay, now you're probably thinking, man, that's still there. Yes, it is. And then another thing that I do is, I've also shared this in, I think, the 10 watercolor mistakes people make or something, and I did like a whole video to share some different techniques, but you can also use a magic eraser. It's going to damage the paper if you go really like hard on like trying to erase it, like scrub it. So you have to be kind of mindful of that and do your best to go gently a bit at a time. And so yeah, I think it kind of, yeah, I mean, yeah, hot press paper, and it is a staining color. So I think if I do more than that, it's pretty much going to damage quite a lot of it. So other thing I do is I use white acrylic and cover up some areas, make it look like nothing ever happened right there. Yeah, so that are a few things that I typically do. Problem 4 is streaky washes. The problem people often talk about is, oh my god, when I use staining colors, they look so streaky and it's difficult to like maneuver them. I would say this happens again probably if you use the staining first and then work on the non-staining over on top, or if you fidget around the layer that you already layered first and you go back quickly and try to maneuver it, it's gonna cause that unevenness. I'm gonna go with this phthalo blue that I have that I absolutely love. I'm using like one jar filled with water, just one, but you might want to separate like 2 cups of jar, maybe even one for staining and the other for non-staining. I know it's hard to differentiate, but it's good to have 2 jars of water. Let me tell you the fixes for this. One is adding the water first, so then you get an even wash. So I added some water right now, and I'm going to, this is a super staining color, but I've created a wash right there. So I don't think that's uneven. With hot press, it's even more difficult to create like really clean wash. Another is, I'm working on this area and I just went over with that, but get like 2 sizes larger than what you think you might need. That could possibly help, because if I were to use this brush and cover this whole area with an even wash, I wouldn't be able to do it. That'll be super hard. And also the unevenness usually doesn't come from the pigment itself. It comes from the lack of control of water and the control of water both ways. But having tons of water actually does help. So look at that. I would say that's a clean, even wash right there, and I didn't wet the surface before I worked into it. There's also the pull technique, which you would then need quite a lot of water, and let's just add, you see that ball of water right there? I can drag that down and drag that down, and I can create like an even wash. So that's the pull technique, also works. Also using a bigger brush than you think you might need and adding a lot of water. It's not really about pigment, I don't think, but because the staining colors are usually very vibrant and bold, it's more clear to the eye what's happening. Maybe that could be playing a part of it. Problem number 5 is everything gets stained. It does. That's just part of it. The thing is, none of us really care. Like once we get into it, I'm like, who cares? Look at my palette. Look how dirty it is. And I don't care. Some people do care. Like the botanical artists, some of them really are very careful with what they place. I would say there are strategies around it, like putting the staining colors into one section. So maybe you have the reds, and my staining colors are usually around here because they're the quinacridins. So yeah, you put them right in one section and, you know, separate them. That's one way of working with it. And then, like I said, using separate jars maybe for staining colors would do the trick as well. And then I have this, I have this magic brush laying around, because if you see this palette right here, this doesn't come off. Do you see? I shouldn't be using my brush for this, but this doesn't come off. It's definitely staining. I try to use this magic eraser. Look, it's scratching the surface a bit to take off that staining color that's right there. At the end of the day, you could take them off, but I don't really care too much. The other thing you can use is porcelain palette. Porcelain palettes often don't stain as much as the plastic ones do, so that might be something that you might want to consider when you start using more staining colors. So staining versus non-staining. Okay, so here I use the staining azo yellow. I'm going to get like a brush I don't mind scrubbing off, and when I do this, I typically use something that I don't really care about. So I'm going to use this Princeton Velvet Touch Angle Shader. It's a synthetic. When you brush things off, it's better to use a synthetic brush because they're more firmer with a spring. So this is the staining azo yellow. It's been a while, so let's try lifting it off. So I'm going to try adding a bit of water right there, seeing how much I can lift off, even tapping it a bit. Yeah, this brush is really good because I've been using it often to scrub things off, but it's okay. Have one brush for that. Man, see, that's what staining is all about. Okay, I think I did my best. So let's go to the non-staining yellow ochre, see what that is like. Ooh, the difference. Yep, definitely easier to lift off. I think you got the hang of what staining, non-staining is. And again, a reminder that permanence is nothing to do with staining or not. It's more to do about the light fast, like whether it's strong against light or not. And also, Shimika was the winner in terms of telling us if it's staining or not on the tube directly. I do want to test in the future how these masking fluids do. This is the frog tape that I absolutely love. Look at that crisp line. And this is like Tessa masking tape that I got while I was living in Germany. I used a hair dryer to dry it out, but yeah, the masking tape started buckling and lifting off, so it's not the best, I would say. But yeah, definitely the frog tape. Look at that clean line. These are the staining colors that I used, and these are the non-staining that I used. So I first went over the whole painting with non-staining colors because that's the procedure you should follow, so to speak. So I used the staining colors, which is Viridian, Yellow Ochre, Cobalt Blue, Buff Titanium, and I must say it was quite hard to kind of restrict myself from, because when I look at the blue per se, it wasn't quite the blue that I wanted. If you look at this Georgia O'Keeffe's Over Blue, definitely it's not just cobalt blue. It's like a mixture of like this really stainy phthalo, almost like phthalo blues that you see, but it's actually like quite close to Prussian blue, I realized. But anyhow, so I couldn't get that like kind of color. So I was wanting to reach out for the rest of the colors, but I restrained myself. And whenever I do these Masters Reimagined series, I kind of realized it looks easy and it's never easy. Doing this whole study makes me like realize that, like, oh yeah, like it's hard. It's not easy what these masters did. And it was the same case for Georgia O'Keeffe. It was just difficult to get that subtlety in the colors and to like kind of blend them so they look like her work, but kind of like have a very clear edge for some areas. It was a mixture of things, but I had to have the mind of what the next layer would kind of look like and how the staining colors will help. So I had to almost like that layer of the staining colors on top of what I was working in order to be like, no, it's okay. Like I have to trust the process. So it was okay. And then the next layer I used in the Viridian areas, I kind of added a bit of the aqua green, but I think the Prussian blue would have done the job, but I kind of went with Prussian blue. I laid those really staining azo yellow, the nickel azo yellow in some areas. I went over the really warmth of the reds with the Pyro orange from Core, which was great. And yeah, I just enjoyed laying those staining colors on top. It was just like everything comes into life, if you know what I mean. I learned this in Agnes Cecil's workshop as well, where she used the transparent orange for just like around the eyes and the mouth and the nose, and it just created this warmth after even she used really cool colors like neutral tint. And I was just like, wow, that is powerful. So learning how to kind of layer with like warm colors or even transparent colors or even staining colors, I think really just instantly creates this magic. So I really enjoyed it. It didn't really cause much lifting. This goes to any type of like painting that you do. Even with watercolor, you'll have to wait. Let the first layer dry before you lay that second layer on top, unless you don't mind blending of color, so to speak. The layering really worked well, and it did create the vibrancy. I think I forgot to take a photo before I worked on the second layer, but hopefully you get the picture. It really gave life to the painting and like the vibrancy, and I see why Georgia O'Keeffe liked these almost like dye kind of behavior of watercolor. And apparently she even used the Japanese very thin papers, which then would mean the paper would have soaked a lot of those watercolor pigments that she used. So I just showed you O'Keeffe's traditional approach, the non-staining base, staining for luminosity. But before I learned this method, I always worked backwards, staining under layer first, then non-staining on top. So this is often called the optical glazing with staining under layer, I guess. But for this final portrait, I want to go back to my old reversed method to see if it can still capture O'Keeffe's glow, even though it's riskier. So let's find out how it turns out. So here's what I learned from trying these two different methods. First, texture versus glow. When I laid the Tundra Orange over the French Ultramarine, both being the granulating colors and non-staining colors, it looks like quite muddy because both pigments granulate. And this is the thing, for my partner, he will look at this and be like, it looks dirty. But for me, I just love that effect. It creates this texture, like a grainy texture that I absolutely adore. The sediment sat on top and killed the luminosity, but honestly, that's really what I truly love. It's not wrong, it's just different from Georgia O'Keeffe's clean glow. So second, staining pigments are reactive. Quinacridone coral looked completely different depending on what was underneath. Over Prussian blue, super punchy. So look over here, you can see that it's quite punchy. It's very like bold right there. That's where I laid down the Prussian blue, and then this is the indigo with the quinacridone coral. So over ultramarine, soft glow. So you can see over here that it's quite soft right here as well. Over indigo, extremely powerful. This is huge. Staining pigments aren't just bright colors. They transform based on the base layer. And third, my old reverse method wasn't wrong. O'Keeffe's way, the non-staining first and staining last, gives you that luminous clarity she's famous for. My way, staining first, non-staining later, optical glazing with staining under layer, creates softer, moodier atmosphere. And I actually love my version more because it matches how I naturally paint. And that's just what I love. I'm drawn into the subtlety of colors. So even if somebody might look at it as muddy, it's actually the effect that I just really connect to. The biggest takeaway, I think there's no, oh, hello garbage truck, is that there are no right or wrong way. I mean, with art, it's like endless. It's infinite, the different things we can do. There are no wrong way, there's just different outcomes, and this is really subjective, what each of us, like including me and you, like doing and what draws you to what you want to create. If you want glow, go for Georgia O'Keeffe's way. If you want more texture and the graininess, then go with using the staining colors first. Understanding pigment behavior means that you can choose intentionally instead of guessing. Now I want to know, which method will you try first, or are you drawn more into? O'Keeffe's traditional style of layering or reversed approach that I often go back to time and time again. I also created an Elsa painting that my son just absolutely loves Frozen and Elsa, so I had to paint it for him. And I had to paint something for the Advent in a Bottle, which is a hashtag you can check out on Instagram. But this is my 3rd year joining into this community, and I've done the opening for it. I'm kind of excited, although I did forget to add the sound to the post, which is quite sad, so I had to make a reel after it. But anyways, yeah, in that painting I went with the staining color and then another staining color, and I didn't use any granulating, any other color other than that, but it's super powerful. It's very unlike my usual painting color wise, but yeah, I really love it. This is the last of my Masters Reimagined series, and I'm super happy that I made it through. It was kind of funny. I started off with January being John Singer Sargent, and yeah, I learned a lot throughout this whole process. Like there's like key things that I learned that really fed into my artist like cycle. So I'm glad I got to finish it. If you have a favorite master artist, check out my playlist. It might be there and you might learn something in depth about certain materials. I think my so far favorite was Klimt. I mean, he's my favorite master artist, so I don't think, yeah. Vincent van Gogh is one of my favorites too, but it turned out that after painting his way of painting, I didn't really like it. You might like an artist, but that doesn't necessarily equal to you like painting in that certain way. John Singer Sargent I love. I think the #1 artist that I felt it was easy for me to paint was Turner's. James W. Turner's paintings, specifically landscapes with watercolor, was pretty like relaxing for me. Yeah, that would have been the #1. For the portraits that I painted that I really enjoyed was Albrecht Dürer. I think his was my favorite so far. I don't know why. And Pablo Picasso. I don't know why, but it turned out one of my favorites. So anyways, if you haven't watched it, watch it right here, and I'll see you in the next video.